Hey guys, this is Anthony Morganti from OnlinePhotographyTraining.com. Welcome to my video series, Mastering the Nik Collection. Several years ago, the Nik Collection of plugins was the #1 set of plugins for Photoshop and Lightroom. Cashing in on their success, they sold off to Google. Google marketed the suite for a couple years with a few updates. Then they announced that they would not be updating the software any longer, and they made it free to download. Around that time, I did a set of training videos on the software that proved to be very popular. Recently, the company DxO purchased the rights to the Nik Collection and announced that they would be developing and updating it. Although it's no longer free, it is nice to have a caretaker for this software because it is very good. With all the good things happening with Nik, I decided to update my training videos on the product. This new series will be more in-depth and thorough than the previous series. Please be aware that I have no affiliation with the company. I'm not being paid by them to do these videos, and if you purchase the software, I will not be making a commission on the sale. With that said, if you could do me a favor, if you like these videos, please click the thumbs up button and share them. Finally, if you can make a donation, I would greatly appreciate it. That info is in the description below this video, along with a link to my Code of Ethics statement. Let's get started. Hey guys, this is the 19th video in the Nik Software Suite video series, and it's our second video on Analog Efex Pro 2. In this video, I'm going to demonstrate how to use Analog Efex Pro 2 as a Lightroom plugin. I'm also going to talk about a few different tools and talk a little bit about control points in this video. We're going to work on this image. This is actually an image of the building that my studio is in. This is the Ellicott Square building. This is the lobby of the Ellicott Square building in Buffalo, New York, and I'm lucky enough to have my studio on the 10th floor of this building. This is a pretty historic building. It was built in 1896, and at the time of its completion, it was the tallest office building in the world. Not anymore. But anyway, we're going to work on this image, and I'm going to send it directly from Lightroom into Analog Efex Pro 2. And by the way, I did do some processing in Lightroom. I did some basic processing. I think I added a little contrast with the tone curve. I added some sharpening, and I did lens corrections. And that's pretty much it. Now I'm ready. I want to send it over to Analog Efex Pro 2. I'm simply going to right-click right on the image. We're going to go down to Edit In, and then down to Analog Efex Pro 2. When you do that, this Edit Photo with Analog Efex Pro 2 dialog box will come in. Now, depending on whether or not you're working on a RAW file, will decide what is active up here at the top. Because this is a RAW file, my only choice is to edit a copy with Lightroom adjustments. That's because Analog Efex Pro 2 does not work directly on RAW files, so it's going to create a different file. In our case, it's going to create a TIFF file. Now, if you are already working on a TIFF file in Lightroom or a JPEG in Lightroom, you'll be able to do one of these other two options, edit a copy or edit the original. I strongly recommend that you always edit a copy and you leave your original as is. So because this is a RAW file, we're going to be editing a copy. Now, file format. I found that all the Nik software plugins work best with TIFF files. You can do a PSD or a JPEG. They work well on JPEGs too. It's PSDs they seem to be a little clunky with. So I found TIFFs they work the best with. Now color space, depending on your operating system and your machine, you'll have different choices here. All of us will have three choices: sRGB, Adobe RGB, and ProPhoto RGB. Some of us may have a P3 option as well. What these are the amount of available colors that will be used in the image. Think of it as a box of crayons. sRGB is the smallest box of crayons. The largest box of crayons of different colors is ProPhoto RGB. It really doesn't matter so much what you use, to tell you the truth. Usually most monitors won't be able to display all the colors in like Adobe RGB or ProPhoto RGB, and even display P3 RGB or display P3 sometimes. So it depends on your monitor what you'll see. Generally speaking though, I use the largest color space available, ProPhoto RGB. Because this is a raw file, it has all the colors there, so I might as well keep them intact as much as possible as I move through different plugins. Bit depth, I recommend 16 bits per component. Resolution, don't go any lower than 240. It is strongly recommended that you put 300 here. If you're using an Epson printer, Epson recommends that you use 360 here. So since I use Epson printers, I'm going to put a 360 there. And I'm not going to do any compression, and we're going to click Edit. So now what Lightroom is doing, you can see in the progress bar in the top left-hand corner, it is creating that TIFF file with those specifications I designated in that box. And it will take a second, and once it does, it should open up in Analog Efex Pro 2, and it will add that one preset that is kind of default on my, at least, Analog Efex Pro 2, which is this classic camera preset, which I don't really care for. It's actually a tool set, I think is what they call it. I'm going to maximize this, make this a little bigger. But I think in this episode, what I want to do is I want to demonstrate a little bit more of some of the tools, a little more detail about some of the tools. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to go to Camera Kit down here. This is what I want to do, where we see our actual tools that we're using. And I'm going to get rid of film type, and I'm going to get rid of lens vignette. I'm going to get rid of dirt and scratches. We'll keep the basic adjustments, because I think probably for most images, we're going to have basic adjustments on them, and then some of the other ones, some of the other tools. So we're with basic adjustments, and I'm going to reset this. I'm going to click right there. So we have this reset. Basically, nothing is being done to the image now. So I could turn it off and turn it on, and you can see nothing is done. Now let's just go through the 4 sliders. The first one is detail extraction. As you move it to the right, it's going to add more detail to the image. But to me, it's kind of a fault with it. When you'll notice when you move it to the right, it affects the luminance level, the brightness level of the image. So you can see as I move detail extraction to the right, it seems to be adding more detail, but it's also making especially the top half of this image considerably brighter. So we have to deal with that. But I'm going to leave that up relatively high because I want as much detail as possible. Now we could bring this brightness back down with the brightness slider, but that kind of brings it uniformly because this is a global adjustment. It's affecting every pixel in the image. So I don't think I want to do any adjustments to the brighter upper half of the image with this brightness slider because it's affecting everything. So I'm going to reset the slider by just double clicking right on the slider itself. Let's see if we add some contrast. I'll add a little contrast. And maybe we'll take saturation down a little bit. Kind of give it more of a washed out color look. Now I still have this, it's still kind of a little more brighter at the top than I like it. Now this is where the control points could come in. I could add a control point and just have it affect a very specific part of the image, a local part. So this is a local adjustment, whereas the entire tool itself is a global adjustment. So I'm going to add a control point by clicking right here. And I'm going to add one in this left-hand corner along the marble up in the top left-hand corner. And you can see that we have the same 4 sliders. We have detail extraction, brightness, contrast, and saturation. This top slider affects the area of influence. What it's doing, for those of you that haven't watched any of my earlier videos on the Nik Software suite, these control points, right where you set the point, right where that little button is, it's looking at the pixels right under that, and it's going to try to match color, texture, and tone for all the pixels that are roughly within this circle. That's the area of influence. So what I want to do is I want to bring brightness down a little bit there. So I want to just make it a little darker. Now if I just show you, you could see that it's just working over here. But what I want it to do is I want to go all the way across the top. So I'm going to bring brightness down to -15 or so. -16 is good. And I'm going to duplicate this exact control point with the exact settings and spread it all the way across the top of the image. To do that, I'm going to hold the Alt or Option key. It's Alt if you have PC, Option if you have a Mac. And when you click and drag, you'll drag out a second point. And I'm then going to do it again. Hold that Alt or Option key in again. Bring one over there. And do it again. Yeah, that looks pretty good right there. So we brought down the brightness by using 4 control points. Now I could look at the area of influence on each of these control points individually by clicking that box. See, that's the area influence on this left-hand control point. Where it's white, it's being affected 100%. Where it's black, it's not being affected at all. And where it's gray, it's somewhere between 0 and 100%. Now, another thing you could do is right above that, there's this little box with a circle in it. If you click there, it'll show you the area of influence of all the control points at once. And you can see that it's mainly affecting the top part of the image. That's where it's brightest. And it's not affecting the bottom part of the image. So the circles aren't exact. They kind of blend, you know, as you approach the circle. But it did a good enough job for me, so I like that. So I think the basic adjustments are done. And I want to add another tool. Now, I'm not going to go too crazy on this, and I'm going to only add a few tools. Typically, I think I mentioned in the last video, I don't use Analog Efex Pro 2. It's not something I typically would do to my images. So a lot of these I don't care for, but for the sake of demonstration, I am going to try to do the best I can. So let's go with dirt and scratches. So I'm going to click there. And by default now, within the dirt and scratches tool, it has strength at 100%, and it picked one of the presets that are within here for dust and lint. And I could turn the tool off by clicking here. And I really can't see much of a difference. I could see almost a little bit of dust right there, if you look very carefully. But you can see that each one gets more pronounced as we go through these presets. So if I go to this bottom right-hand corner one, I think they'll be a little more obvious. There you can see a lot of dirt and scratches on that. Not really something I care for. Now under the drop-down, we have more choices. We have, that's dust and lint, by the way, is what we were on. Scratches. Let's see what that one looks like. Okay, that one's not too bad. You can see that there's some scratches there. You can see them along up in here. Kind of looks a little more natural to me. There's organic. Let's pick like that one. And it takes a second to render. And, you know, that one's not too bad either. I kind of like that one. Then we have eroded. And erodeds are a little more pronounced, it looks like. Let's see what this one looks like. Yeah, you could see that it kind of looks like mold almost, that mold on a slide or something like that. Also, you could see you could adjust, you can move it around. There's a little button right here, and you could adjust it. You could also come outside usually and flip things. I'm not sure if we could do it on this one. No, can't. On some of these, be aware that the box, you could come outside and spin it, is what I'm getting at. And this one, you can't do that with. Let's go back to scratches and let's go to that one. I kind of like that one. So that is dirt and scratches. Let's add another one. Let's add a film type. We'll add that. And we have some warm film types by default. You could see here that it has, you know, that. Let's go to something that's very obvious. This one here. This is very warm. You can see we have some cool types. You can see there's a very cool one. We have some more subtle looks. Kind of a subtle look. And we have a black and white natural look. And then we have a black and white tone look, so like a sepia tone or something like that. Let's go with a warmer look, like right like that, just for the sake of this demonstration. Now below that, we do have some sliders. Do you want a more faded look, so it looks more like an old image? You can see as I move that to the right. Or do you want it more neutral? You can see how it's really affecting the contrast of the image. Let's go with a more faded look. Strength, right now, by default, it's at 50%. If I move it to the right, you can see it's starting to get warmer. So it's affecting, or it's applying this warm film filter stronger. If I go to the left, it's kind of removing it. So let's keep it kind of strong. Move it to the right. Now, as far as grain itself, you can see to the left, it's kind of is counterintuitive. You'll get more grain, more looking, or the more obvious grain as you move this to the left. Then with that soft or hard slider, you could make the grain look very hard or smooth it out a little bit. Hopefully you could see that in the video as I slide that back and forth. Now, in this case, let's add a little grain, but not too much. All right, so that is our film type. Now, finally, let's go to multi-lens. And you can see as I add these, I don't think I mentioned it, as I hover over the tool I want to use, there's a little plus sign. And I'll click on that. Now we're adding multi-lens. Now you can see this, by default, it picked this preset. And you'll notice that preset, it like split the image into 3 parts. But one curious thing about this is the left is now the right and the right is now the left. Now if I want to correct these, if I hover over this, say this left one, you could see now that this little button appears. And I mentioned too about tilting. Remember I said on some of these filters or tools, you could come outside the little box and tilt it. You could see how the cursor turned into this double curved arrow. So I could actually tilt this if I wanted to, but I don't really want to. We'll do our best to straighten that. But what I want to do is move the left on the left and the right on the right. So we'll start with this right side, which is on the left side, and just grab that and just move it that way. Okay? Then we'll go to this one and we'll grab it and I'll move it that way. Now you can see the left is on the left and the right is on the right. So it is now the way it should be. Now we could control the border. Right now it has a white border. I could click there and give it a black border. Or I could click there and everything will be kind of scrunched together with lines, which kind of defeats the purpose of using the multi-lens filter, if you ask me. So let's go with that white border. How narrow or thick do you want the border? That slider there. And vignette. Move that to the right. You can see it's starting to darken the corners and the edges. Move it to the left and it kind of whitens those corners and edges. Again, you could double click on the slider itself and it kind of puts it to its kind of default position for the filter you're using. In this case, let's darken the edges a bit. The variation strength. This is kind of the variation between these 3 panels. As you move it to the right, you can see it's kind of fading out this one, but not fading out the far right one at all. But that's the variation type number 1. If I go to variation type number 2, you can see it looks like they're all pretty equal. Number 3, the middle one is dark and those 2 on the outside are more lighter. This one here, kind of, you know, whatever. This one, it looks like this one is more washed out and these other 2 have more color. So, and then you could adjust the strength with that slider. So let's try to find something we like there. All right, let's go with that. And you'll notice that in this tool, they don't have any choice for control points because it's just the way it is. So you could, again, you could affect each of these panels or adjust each of these panels by hovering over the panel and then going to the box and moving it around. So I have this image that I sent over from Lightroom and I applied 4 different tools to it by using the camera kit. This is where you could kind of build your own. Now, if I wanted to create a preset here, I can by going over to save. So let's say this is something I do a lot. This is my style. And I sell these kind of triptych prints a lot. And I want to create a preset because I do this so much and I want to be consistent in all my images. So I could click save and I would give my preset a name and I'm going to go call it something I'd never do because I don't think I'd ever do that. But let's click there And now I have it. And remember, we had one I created in our last video. I called Tony's Look. I'll click on that, and you can see that it has that kind of light leak there. And then this one that I just created just now. All right. So let's say I'm satisfied with this, and we're going to save it. So I'm going to click over here in the bottom right-hand corner, click Save. And it's going to save the image. And if it's working correctly, it should open up in Lightroom. And when it does, we'll go to Lightroom. And there it is. It's going to take a second to render, though, I found sometimes. You can see it's really not rendering. Oops. There it is. So it takes a second to render. But there's our image. And of course, there is our original image, and there's that image. A little bent. Remember, I twisted that one side, and I really didn't straighten it out properly. But you get the idea of what you can do now with Analog Efex Pro 2 using those 4 tools, and what you could do with control points. Now in our next video, I'm going to use Analog Efex Pro 2 as a Photoshop plugin. We're going to talk about some more tools, and we're going to talk about some more features of Analog Efex Pro 2. Thank you, everyone that watches my videos. I really do appreciate it. I'll talk to you guys soon.